It seems like today there is a lot of discussion about these other markets and whether they are going to rival China and Silicon Valley. So Andy and Claudia, Andy is going to lead this tech chat with Claudia, and they both know both markets, Brazil and China. So stay tuned for this. And go ahead, Andy. Andy Tsao is a managing director with Silicon Valley Bank Global Private Equity Services, and he leads SVB's Global Gateway. With 20-plus years experience, he works with VC and PE clients as well as tech companies expanding internationally. On his left is Claudia Munce, is managing director of the IBM Venture Capital Group, which was founded in 2004 to promote an innovation ecosystem globally. She's also a VP of Corporate Strategy at IBM. She serves on the advisory board of several venture firms, as well as the board of the Latin America VC Association. So let's let them have a dialogue, a conversation about Brazil and China.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm Andy Tsao from Silicon Valley Bank. We've been calling on the China market since the late 1990s, and that resulted in full-time offices since 2005. And this year is a real watershed year for us in China. Some of you may have heard that we've received our license for a joint venture bank with the Shanghai Pudong Development Bank, and that bank is in the midst of a launch. And we aspire to be the leading technology bank in China. But while there's a lot of exciting things happening in the China market, there's no shortage of activity going on in other parts of the world. And I think Claudia, who I'm delighted to be chatting with tonight, really was instrumental in helping us become aware, in some respects, of what's happening in Brazil. In terms of context, I think Claudia, with what you're doing with Smart Camp, you invited some of our team to go down to Brazil back in 2011, and that resulted in Claudia helping us to arrange a delegation of sorts that we took down in the spring of this year. That included our chief exec, Bill Tai, went along on that trip. And as well as some of Don Dixon's team came along with us as well, and we got to meet quite a number of entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, government officials, a real good cross section of the Brazil ecosystem, and we came back very enthusiastic about what's happening in Brazil. From my perspective, I see a lot of similarities to China in the early days, and we can talk a bit about that tonight. From our perspective at SVB, we're going to be continuing to call on the Brazil market, and I think we'll continue to look at what direct business opportunities that we have in that exciting market. But Claudia, I know maybe we can start a little bit with what you're doing. IBM obviously has a lot going on in both Brazil and in China, but from your perspective, maybe from what you're doing with Smart Camp. You work with a lot of entrepreneurs in both markets. Maybe you can give us some insights.
Thanks, Andy. Just really quickly, because I know you and I are between cocktail and these people. Actually, there's one more person before we can go. We're part of this whole ecosystem in Silicon Valley. We've been around as an investor, as a partner, as an acquirer. IBM, does anybody need me to explain IBM business? IBM is a very old company. Last year, we celebrated our century, 100 year of IBM. At the same time, we named our first woman CEO. Yay, come on, yay. So as you guys saw, she just got, last night when we were at the Intel Capital CEO Day, which sounds like everybody else was there. She was actually, 20 minutes from us receiving the Forbes Most Powerful Businesswoman Award for the year. So we're very, very big company, very proud company, of course. We're in 173 countries. The venture
Brazil is your leading one?
is mine, but I'm not quite sure. But it's true, though. I think Rebecca knows the story. 173 countries where we do business, 100 years of doing business. Brazil is the number 2 country that IBM went in, second to U.S. 98 years ago, IBM, a U.S. corporation, entered Brazil to run its very first census. It was back then the only tabulation company in the world. So the government in Brazil came to U.S. for this only tabulation company in the world to enter Brazil and help them with the very first national census. So fast forward, we are, as part of the venture community, as part of the corporate strategy, we are, as Andy mentioned, we're very enthusiastic about leveraging the partnerships that we have with the venture capital communities that Silicon Valley Bank serve, because we are a company that does a lot of partnership. Actually, if you look at our business model, for those of you that follow us a little bit, we really became much more of a solution, of an integration, of a service business in the last few decades. And with that, came to the need to really tap into the innovation from a much broader level than our own R&D capability. As much as we're proud of being able to have our own R&D engines that invented Fortran, invented magnetic, disk drive and all that stuff. But the world has changed, and we recognize it. So in year 2000, this team was set up. Ironically, I was head of IBM Research in Technology Transfer. So my CEO came to me and said, well, I don't want you to look internally. I want you to look at outside and see what we can get from this incredible startup community, which, as you all know, in year 2000 was investing, $100 billion into startup. We invest about $6 billion, which is pretty small in comparison. So today, our operation really focuses on how do we work with both the global venture community and the local community to find these partners that we can either partner with, bring their solution, and of course, the startup solution are those little components that really push you over the envelope, right? They're sort of, by default, the most innovative. By default, they're trying to disrupt. By default, they're trying to accelerate. Everything our customer is asking us for are in what these companies are doing. So the group is very active. We're in 32 countries now. Brazil, China, as Rebecca said, is to my heart because I'm a Chinese Brazilian. I was born in China, grew up in Brazil and Argentina, and came to U.S. for grad school like everybody else. So I've been really active. As Rebecca said, I'm on the board of Latin American Venture Capital Association. I'm on the board of U.S. Venture Capital Association. But also, the Smart Canvas is about how do you find these innovators, that you can bring together and get them to build successful companies.
Yeah, well, Claudia, you're out there all the time with these startup camps. I mean, what do you see? What is the level of entrepreneurship and talent, China versus Brazil?
Entrepreneurship is so global, and Andy will attest to that. When we were in Brazil, we were mocked. I mean, when they saw the Silicon Valley Bank, which obviously banked the startup in Silicon Valley, which the world still want to mimic, has arrived to Brazil, everybody wanted to show up because there's such a drive for the entrepreneur. It's really interesting because a few years back, I will look at the company in Brazil and they will look at their lifestyle business more as a lifestyle, small market, local market, Latin America. In the last few years, it has really become much more of an entrepreneurship for the venture model. They're looking for the global expansion. Brazil obviously has a tremendous market. So if you go back to 2004, which is when I started, when I set a group in China, as Andy said, is very similar. That entrepreneurial drive that I can make something successful, for the markets that I serve in my own country is almost identical.
Well, Claudia, I think you have a really unique vantage point as a Chinese who grew up in Brazil, and looking at the cultural differences between China and Brazil in terms of entrepreneurship. I know, Feng Deng talked about the education system and how that has impacted, the sort of innovation in China. Do you see, what do you see from your perspective, being both Chinese and Brazilian? Do Brazilian entrepreneurs have, are they more predispositioned to entrepreneurship perhaps, or what are the challenges for Brazilian entrepreneurs?
I think the Chinese are by nature, by culture, much more entrepreneurial. The Latin American in general, God bless them, has a beautiful culture, but is much more laid back, is much more, about work-life balance, is much more about tomorrow. Everything that can be done tomorrow, why do it today? Is a very different culture. So the entrepreneurs are actually rising from, sort of an outlier of their traditional culture, but they're rising great forces. I mean, you and I witnessed at 21212.
Absolutely.
And it's just incredible. These are young people. They tend to be, just fresh out of college, work a few years. It's not very different than what you see here in Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, Rebecca, we were all sitting here. Bill was there, Andy and his CEO. And we're saying, God, if you were telling us that we're in Silicon Valley, Sand Hill right now, we wouldn't know the difference. And it's that type of, so when you peel away the entrepreneur from Brazil, and not the overall culture of Brazil, you will find a lot of similarity, even though the culture, the fundamental culture is so different.
Well, when you look at the Brazil market today, again, similarities back to China in the early 2000s, you're seeing an influx of international capital now starting to come in, particularly from the venture perspective. Yes. Sequoia's opened up shop there. Redpoint's announced their new fund.
Yep.
So, do you see Brazil playing out in a similar way to the way China?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think in the beginning of China, there are the best of the valley that went there and was able to do some great things there. I mean, there was a little bit of false start a few times, we all know. And I think Brazil is going through that same phase. And prior to our trip, I was there with Jim Breyer, who we all know as the investor of Facebook, and he invested in, Beijo Urbano there, which is a Brazilian Groupon, basically. They were attracting this incredible talent because these guys are the one who wants to be the frontiers, creators. They are the front runners when they see the opportunity. So Brazil is getting that same benefit of getting these people to show up.
I'm just recalling how Silicon Valley Bank took the first group of VCs to India and then the first group of VCs to China. And you have done the same thing for Brazil?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to look back and see.
As a matter of fact, wasn't there a story that you guys, when you guys were doing the Brazil delegation, a lot of VC tell you not to do it?
That's
because
right.
they want to keep the best kept secret to themselves.
It's a cozy market right now, and they didn't want to.
We need to find the next Brazil.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, go ahead.
But again, just sort of looking back at the parallels to the China market, you mentioned Piche Urbano, which is one of the most talked about companies in the venture scene there, and they're kind of the Groupon, but they're moving into being an internet portal in general, very backed by some very good venture capital firms, including Benchmark and Tiger.
Fenton,
Absolutely. And so you have, again, a similarity in terms of here are some clone businesses taken from the West, like China did, and now you're seeing some big companies being built. Does does Brazil follow that same pattern?
Oh, absolutely. We laugh about, I actually just came back from China about 72 hours ago. So, we laugh about C2C and C2B, right? C2C is copy to China and C2B is copy to Brazil.
That's good. I'll have to remember that one.
Yeah, very similar in that sense, yes.
And, the prior panel talked about this being kind of the early days of China becoming much more globally innovative. What will it take for Brazil to get to that same stage? Clearly they're much further behind or earlier where China is.
Yes, I absolutely think that, we're talking about really a horizon of 4 to 6 years. With Brazil hosting the World Cup 2014, which is really sort of a stepping stone to the 2016, Summer Olympic. I mean, everything that the Brazilian government are doing now is aiming at that 2016 because they look at 2008 Beijing, and that was China's coming out party. So they really see the 2016 Rio de Janeiro, remember, there's no beach in Beijing, is going to be the coming out party for Brazil.
But already some interesting differences because I think no one had any doubt that China was going to get all the infrastructure done in time for the Olympics. But I understand Brazil's already, a bit behind in terms of what they need to do.
Remember, what you can do tomorrow, why do it today?
Okay. Okay, so I guess looking at maybe some of the complexities of doing business in either market. I mean, there's certainly a lot of exciting growth going on. But, I think in China, you always see the sort of the specter of the government that you have to deal with all the time. And I think the last panel talked about, you really need a good local partner. Well, I think that's very much true for Brazil as well.
Very much.
And you have a very complicated tax code.
Absolutely.
So, when you look at having done business extensively and looking at entrepreneurship in both markets, what is more challenging from your view? Is it more complex to build a good business in China, or is it or Brazil?
I think it's Brazil because you're still sort of pioneers in many ways, and that's why I mentioned they have the benefit of that same mode of getting the best of the best mind to focus on that. But there's still a lot of untested frontier issues. For example, there's no exit in Brazil, right? Is the only exchange in Brazil is not positioned to really work with, companies because it takes about $3 million to file for an IPO in Bovespa today. So, how do you attract, and also there's the policy about pension fund being able to invest in a venture portfolio. That is a huge issue as well. So I think the growing pain that China has gone through, we're going to be seeing, and not necessarily at the faster pace, unfortunately. Even though everything, is moving faster and faster and faster, I think the evolution of the Brazil venture ecosystem is going to be still, at a fairly slow pace because there's so many, like I said, the entrepreneur are more of an outlier of the culture than it is the culture changing with them.
Well, let's try not to end on a down note, and to wrap this up, I'm sure we can go on about this all night, really. But as we look at exits, and it's a difficult exit market in China right now, and as you mentioned, there really hasn't been a significant exit in Brazil yet. So, when do you think that might happen in Brazil? Are there some substantial companies out there that you're expecting to see, big things from?
Unfortunately, I think there are a couple of them, but they are still going to be outliers. Then they are going to be the leader of a pack that follows. I think the investment in there is going strong, as you and I both see the movement, and you guys are doing great there. But the successful company in that pipeline is still pretty weak.
Okay. Well, thank you, Claudia.
All right.
Thank you, Andy. Let's give
And I'm going to be responsible in taking Rebecca to Brazil, sounds like, right?
I need to get there and check out what's going on.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please don't go away. Porter Harrisman is coming to the stage, and Porter has this very insider story to tell us about Alibaba. And if we could get some of the people that are out in the hallway to come in, it would be great to hear Porter.
What is the innovation?
I feel very confident.
Found out that anyone that had a really interesting idea,
usable for everybody.
So finding the fit is very important.
Doing things the right way.
New partnerships, new licensing, new investments in place.
Innovation Dialogue, East meets West in Silicon Valley.